Welcome to Vantage Point. I'm Marcia Boyles, and I'd like to begin, as usual, by introducing my co-host and co-producer, Kathleen Taylor.
Hi.
Hi, Kathleen. Kathleen is our clinical social worker at the medical center. Yeah, this is always a mouthful. I'd like to start by introducing our guest today, Sandy Grendel. Sandy, we're delighted to have you come today and are very pleased that you are willing to do it. Sandy, you're not just a friend, but in addition, you have helped us out on a number of things.
Right.
Most recently, teaching the ethical wills in our Legacy Forum. Sandy, I think I would describe you as a community activist in that you're involved with the art wall. You're teaching a drawing class, I know.
Well, I'm leading it. Teaching is, okay.
All right, teaching in quotation marks is the way I
Right.
think you'd put it. Okay. And you and your husband have been here, I think, 5 years?
5 years.
You said, and I know you're also involved in church things.
Right.
In addition, you are a
I was a speech-language pathologist.
Speech pathologist, and I think there's a relevance to that, which we'll get into in a few minutes. I thought I would start today by talking a little bit about the fact that I had pushed this particular topic today, and it is anxiety. Anxiety, particularly in view of the times and things changing. Now, I push this because I find myself feeling more anxiety these days, and I think many of my friends are as well. Certainly this is partially, at least, due to the political situation that we're all observing. No matter what your political stripe, I think we all recognize the divisiveness that is amongst us and some of the, I think, political uncertainties that we're all feeling. But I think it's more than that. I think it's the technology that we don't necessarily understand. It's what seems to be changing mores, changing attitudes. Again, things that we haven't seen before and we're a little bit uncertain about. Now, I thought I would also point out, in talking about anxiety and dealing with anxiety, that the three of us have very different backgrounds, and therefore we have somewhat different points of view, which I think really add to the depth of the conversation I'm hoping we'll have today. And that is, my background as a biologist. I'm assuming, of course, that everything is a physical reaction. You, Sandy, as a speech pathologist, certainly looked at the psychological aspects as well as the physiological, I'm sure.
Right.
And Kathleen is our real expert on anxiety and stress as the mental health expert at the medical center. So we're coming at it somewhat differently, but I think that really does enrich a conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Kathleen, to tell us what is anxiety, what are we experiencing, and why?
Oh my goodness.
Other than that, there's no...
I'm feeling very stressed right now.
I'll bet.
But yeah, I'm excited that we're doing this topic for sure, because I do agree that the world is a stressful place for us. And I'm going to start with stress because I think that stress overload is really the precursor to anxiety and depression and other kinds of emotional reactions. So yeah, I see things both as the stress reaction as both something that happens physically and something that affects us emotionally. So it's sort of a total kind of reaction that people have to stress, and everybody reacts to stress differently. That's for sure. But to your point, I think that with all the change that's happening in the world right now, how rapidly things are changing, how much we are inundated every day with all of this information from so many sources, I think it's hard for people to know how to react to it. And there's, as you said, just so many different changes to our mores, to how people are reacting to one another. Our values seem to be shifting. There's just a lot of things that are going on that can really make the world feel very unpredictable. And when I think about unpredictability, that's where I think that it really engages our stress reaction. Because the stress reaction, is the heart. As a biologist, the stress reaction is very hardwired into our bodies. It's actually a physical reaction to a perception of threat in our environment. So what that means is if we see something that we don't understand, then that will flood our body with biochemicals, which are going to help us either fight or run away from this perceived threat. And that reaction is meant to protect us. It's a survival mechanism.
Okay, so we have an immediate threat. A car's about to hit us.
Right.
And that triggers a really quick, in fact, so quick, it's really before our eyes register what has happened.
Yep.
And that is adrenaline or norepinephrine from the adrenals. And that's the fight or flight. And aren't they talking about fight or flight or freeze?
Fight or flight or, freeze, play dead.
Play dead.
Which is actually another part of it. It's kind of an extension of, it's a different way of flight. Instead of physically getting out, you remove yourself, like animals play dead. Animals play dead.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a psychological removal.
No, I think it's just the way the body kind of shuts down as a way of protecting itself.
All right.
So
that's the short-term kind of stress.
So that's where the hardwiring comes in, is that it's a survival mechanism.
You
it's
bet.
what kept us safe, back in the days when we were having to protect ourselves.
So that you could run real quick if you were about to be eaten by a tiger.
That's right, right. Now, what we're talking about is the reactions that are long-term stress reactions. Stress is meant to peak and then allow your body to get back to a steady state, that the whatever biochemicals have been in your system are now, out of it.
So this is the cortisone, the cortical steroids.
That you're going to be able to let those go away, and you're going to get back to kind of a normal physiological state.
That's the healthy situation.
That's the not stimulated, not stressed state. But when you've got all of this input all of the time, it becomes hard to get back to that steady state. So you're always under a degree of stress potentially, which is that you start to perceive threat everywhere. So it's like your stress reaction is getting activated all the time. And that's where you get that long-term stress that really has the negative effect on your body and on your cognition and on your emotional state. And that's what we really are talking about today.
Okay, all right. So it's a constant state of stress then. And you used a word predictability. Is that a major issue that we feel that we can't predict what is going on in our world anymore?
Well, I think that what we're hardwired to is react to a change. That if we see something in our environment that we don't understand, then that kind of activates the stress reaction. Because we need to be able to understand in order to be able to know whether it's a danger or whether it's not a danger. So predictability is good. We know this. We know that if we know what to expect in our environment, then we feel
more
safer and calmer and more in control. And when things become more unpredictable and we don't know what to expect, then that over time can really start to contribute to stress overload.
And that's a lot of that is the control issue too, don't you think? That if we don't feel like we have any control over what's happening and any input into something, so it's not predictable for us, then that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that when you start to experience stress overload, then control becomes really important. You feel out of control and you need to feel like you can regain control. And I think that when a lot of times that's not possible, then that becomes really another thing that contributes to your stress, is not being in control. Sort of a circular kind of effect in a way. So control or not in control. Depending on the situation, that may be okay or not okay.
Okay.
But if you're like, we talk about positive stress too, right? We talked about, you're in a situation where you're learning something new, you're learning how to dance.
But that's short term, isn't it, normally?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to like get sort of stuck on the short term and the long term so much as I am kind of the effects on your system. So if you're thinking about learning how to dance, then you kind of are in the moment excited, but also a little bit scared maybe because you don't know what to expect. So there's the unpredictability. But once you get into the situation and you begin to feel like you're in better control, that you're starting to master the situation a little bit, then your stress level goes down. So the positive stress is good because it's what gets us, stretches us and gets us maybe excited in a new way in the world. But that has a positive effect, and eventually you're going to start to feel comfortable. So, yeah.
We also talked a little bit about the fact that aging involves, to some extent or another, loss of control.
Right.
Loss of ability to do certain things that were important. And so I think there is, that just seems to accompany aging.
Yeah. I don't know, I feel like loss of control is kind of, it happens that way, but I think it's sort of like a perception too. Remember we were talking about how perception of stress makes a difference? I have a assessment that I do with people sometimes, which is called the perceived stress assessment. And it's based on asking a person questions about, in their life, in these situations, have you felt a certain way? And what it's meant to capture is the idea that nobody perceives or reacts to stress in the same way. So Marcia and I were talking before the show, you could have somebody who, if you look at on paper their life, you would go, wow, this person has got to be having a hard time because they've just gone through all of these things that anybody, would experience a lot of stress from. And that person doesn't measure as being particularly stressed. And conversely, you might have somebody whose life seems like pretty easy from your standpoint, and they're over the top in terms of stress. So it's the perception of stress, the perception of threat that makes the difference. Not the actual situation a lot of times.
Do you have the sense that some of that is inborn?
That's a really hard question. I know you always ask me these questions about
The biology of
the
it,
biology.
the genetics of it?
I mean, I think that what we're finding out now is that DNA is affected over generations by different life experiences.
Yes. The stress itself can...
That trauma, a culture that's experienced a lot of trauma, their DNA has been actually altered.
Yes.
The following generations have had a DNA that's altered by that. But I mean, I don't know, certainly resilience, the ability to be resilient to stress is a survival mechanism.
Yes.
So
yes.
I would tend to think that maybe that's there some way, but I think it's also, just learned behaviors, which I think is important to know too, because what we're talking about is the fact that though you can't control the fact that you're going to be exposed to stress, you can control how you respond to stress. And those are learned behaviors. Those are awarenesses and behaviors that you have the ability to modify.
Could you tell us a little bit about the kinds of reactions that people have to stress? You said everybody reacts differently to stress. And I mean, Sandy, how do you feel stress? When you're stressed, how do you feel?
I get anxious, I worry about things. If it's really bad, there's the knot in the stomach. I've talked to some people recently about this, what they feel like when they feel stressed, and it's loss of appetite sometimes, or it goes the other way. People eat more because they're stressed. Some people can't sleep, that seems to be a pretty common response.
Yep.
Feeling anxious, worrying about things.
Yes.
Sleeping, more or less, so.
Yeah, those are definitely some of those
Irritability.
things.
Irritability, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Tension.
Did people ever talk about tension? Like physical
Oh,
tension?
I'm sure, yeah.
Yes, and the shoulders
your
and
neck
back.
and all of that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. That's one of the first clues. Hypersensitivity to noise.
Well, that is really, when people talk about anxiety, a lot of times I think what they're talking about is hypersensitivity or hypervigilance is the word that I use, which is basically, and that creates irritability because it's like your senses are on high alert all of the time, because it's that idea that you are on guard, that you're looking at your environment and trying to figure out where the threat is. That's the fight or flight reaction when it's gone kind of bad. So that creates a lot of irritability because it's just that, what I say is vibrating in place. You're just like, always feeling like something might be just about to happen in a bad way. And how that does affect you is then you get very sensitive to noise. You might not be able to tolerate being around people very much because maybe they just get on your nerves somehow. You find yourself maybe not being able to go to the dining room because it's noisy there, or there's people that again might get on your nerves.
No.
But it's just that really being so sensitive, and then that sort of leads to the other levels of the stress overload is that you kind of tend to withdraw a little bit and spend more time by yourself with those racing thoughts, with those racing anxious thoughts that can then start to contribute to depression and true anxiety.
Well, I want to ask, we've talked about a lot about the symptoms or how these feelings, but what do we do about them? That seems to me the real key issue is, does Green Spring are there programs in place here for helping people deal with some of these feelings, or what do we do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we know that there are things that you can do. I think the first thing that everybody needs to do is to get an awareness of, whether they are experiencing a stress overload. Because that's going to be the key to motivating people to the next step. So I think a lot of times people are vaguely, they're aware that they're not feeling good, that they are kind of grouchy all the time. Maybe their husband or their wife is saying, wow, you just snapped my head off, what's going on? But that person might not really be aware of what it is that's really happening. And so that awareness is going to then, for me, it's going to kind of trigger a certain amount of actions from people. And one of them, I think, is that you really just need to get a good physical. Make sure that there's not anything going on medically that might be contributing. Because we know that it works the other way too, that a lot of stress has physical impact. Either way, you need to sort of see your doctor. And
So are you suggesting that there are medical conditions that can contribute to a feeling of anxiety?
Well, I think that both ways. There's certainly
I hadn't thought about it in that direction.
physical conditions that I think it gets confused because I think that blood sugar, if you're diabetic, is one that I think people are familiar with. That is, if your blood sugar gets particularly low or high, that you're going to experience anxiety.
Okay.
And people that have diabetes, for example, that's what they key in on. Is one of the things that they understand, is a cue for them to check their blood sugar. But mostly, what we're talking about is the fact that if you have a lot of certain pre-existing condition, COPD, breathing problems, diabetes, cardiac problems, many, but I'm just trying to pull a few out, that stress is going to exacerbate those conditions. But also the wear and tear of stress on the body over time can actually create, cardiovascular disease and other kinds of problems as well. Gastrointestinal problems, because people do a lot of times experience stress in their stomachs. They start to, develop a lot of uneasy stomach kinds of symptoms. They don't feel good a lot of times when they eat, that sort of thing. And that can, sometimes go into something like irritable bowel or something. But
So the effects really of stress are cumulative, is what you're saying.
well, it's wear and tear on your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Cortisol.
wear and tear on your body. So as a result, over time, the more wear and tear you have on your body, the more possibilities that parts of your body are going to break down. So that's the physical part. And then the emotional part, is also cumulative.
Does it lead eventually to a sort of flattening of emotions?
Well, I think that that's one of the things that can happen. I think that that's sort of, what we talked about in terms of how people react, that fight, flight, or play dead kind of reaction. So if people are like overstimulated for a long period of time in terms of, feeling all of this stress, then everything, physically and emotionally, they might just become fatigued, and that the best way for them to deal at that point is to just kind of withdraw, and they might be sleeping more, and they might be avoiding a lot of contact with other people, that sort of thing. That's a reaction, looks like depression, very often can, end up being a true clinical depression at some point.
Okay. Well, go back to what can we do about it?
Right. So other than getting a physical and finding out if there's anything going on medically that's contributing, then, the things that we talk about are really, kind of the things that we always talk about in terms of having a healthy lifestyle, taking care of yourself. Exercise, of course, exercise is a good way to diffuse that anxious energy and irritability that people have. And it also, I think from a biochemical standpoint, it helps get the adrenaline or whatever, the cortisol that still sort of might be lingering in your system out in a healthy way. So exercise is really, really a good way to deal with that. And so eating right, being around other people, hopefully.
Sociability.
Socializing,
Yeah.
doing things that you enjoy.
Are there any groups
You had
that
asked
they
that.
have?
The groups that we have are the groups that would allow you to do things that you enjoy. We don't have any specific classes on stress reduction.
Okay.
I will admit that's probably something that would be really wonderful to have for sure. We have yoga. All of the activities in the fitness center, certainly. And I think anytime you do a physical activity, especially if you go to the fitness center, you also get the social aspect.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-for-1 kind of an experience, because you get that kind of conviviality that you're being with people. But some people are solitary exercisers, and that's good too. But art, certainly, music. Doing, reading, whatever, whatever gives you pleasure and satisfaction. Definitely things also to do is unplug as much as possible. I think people are getting to the point now where they realize that listening to the news for any length of time is not a good idea, because it starts to stress you out. You can't take it anymore. You just have to click it off. That's very healthy. People that are on social media probably need to, decrease that as well. So there are lots of things that you can do, but you have to be motivated to do them.
Right. And so if anybody wanted to join one of these groups that they weren't currently in, they're in the handbook, right? And
Right.
there's a list of all those.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think something like a drawing class or an art class is a good example of positive stress, that people that are not necessarily, don't feel that they're artists, but would like to try something new, that would be a really, really good thing.
Sure.
The memoir writing.
And memoir writing.
This is the same way. I think it's very therapeutic.
Yeah, because you do get the interaction with the other people in the group too.
Exactly.
So it's not just focused on one specific thing, but you then it becomes almost a network kind of experience where you start talking about other things than
yeah.
what
There's a
the
bonding.
specific.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know, I think all of us, I mean, we've all set New Year's resolutions, and we've all made resolutions for ourselves that we're going to start living more healthily. And sometimes it's hard, and sometimes we don't do it. In fact, usually with New Year's resolutions, we don't do it.
Right, right. Yes, good point. Well, I think that sometimes what happens when people are truly, experiencing either anxiety or depression, lack of motivation related to just having a lot of stress, they can't do it on their own. It just turns out to be too hard, that they can't kind of get themselves over the hump. And that's where I really do feel that going to a mental health professional can be very helpful, because it can help you kind of sort through what's going on that's creating a barrier for you to be able to do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. I mean, we've talked, we're getting a signal that it's almost time to leave, and I don't want to bring this up necessarily at the end, but what we are finding with all of the things that are going on now in the news, that people are getting traumatized, that there are things that are, they're not getting traumatized by what's going on in the news, but it's bringing up a historical trauma for them.
Oh.
And we know with the hashtag #MeToo movement that a lot of women are now remembering things 30, 40, 50 years ago in their past that are kind of bubbling up to the surface now, that we have permission to be able to talk about these things more openly. And so that's, a lot of times when you're having trouble, it might be related to something that you maybe haven't really dealt with that's in your past too. So that's where, much as you would like to be able to handle it on your own, the benefit of having that professional to be able to guide you through that experience could be very beneficial.
I'm also having residents tell me that not only are they sometimes reliving things like a sexual assault, but that some of their children also are, and that the children are coming to them for the first time with their stories.
Oh, right.
So that there's
Wow.
also that added stress,
Yeah.
which I hadn't really thought about, but that's what I'm hearing now.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. We have run out of time.
I see we have.
And I think that we knew we were going to do this, that we were going to have too much to say to get into one show.
Kathleen, this has been very helpful. I want to thank you for your willingness to help us with this. I think we really are all, many of us at least, feeling a special anxiety these days, and you have been a source of great help, I think.
Thanks.
Both today and
Absolutely.
generally.
Well, it's understandable. I think that's people need to just know that this is like very understandable, that you would be feeling the way that you're feeling.
All right, I think that I think that in itself is some solace.
That's right.
And we will survive.
You
but-
will. Well, you will.